Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? I'm Robert Nelson. I am the program manager for Pueblo, New Mexico, and the co-host of Impact and Coffee. We welcome everybody. As you're entering into the Zoom, you are on mute, yes, but if you could also mute your video so we can focus on the panelists this morning, that would be super helpful. I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Michael Green. How are you doing this morning, Michael?
Hey, good morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here. I think we've got an interesting panel set up, so it'll be nice to hear some new ideas and hear from the funders' perspectives. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing pretty well. It's nice out today. I can't believe how nice it is out today. Michael, could you tell us a little bit about what Impact and Coffee is and share that with folks?
Sure, yeah. So Impact and Coffee is a nonprofit meetup. We usually get together the first 3 Tuesdays of the month where we can kind of share ideas and best practices and tips and tricks and maybe even some of the difficulties that we're having. So then that way we can kind of help each other out, see where there's room for collaboration, see what kind of advice we can give. And it's just a nice way to bring members of the nonprofit community together in a networking component. So we used to meet at the Albuquerque Community Foundation up until, the pandemic hit, and so we've been doing it online with Zoom since, and it's been a great way to kind of just talk about some of the stuff that we're experiencing and going through. So yeah, that's kind of what Impact and Coffee is and why we're here today. And today is also Gratitude Tuesday, so we'd love for you guys to share anything that you're grateful for in the chat, and I guess I will start. I'm just grateful that I had a couple of days off recently. It was nice to kind of, decompress and relax a little bit over the holidays, even though they were not your typical holidays, but it was a nice time to kind of just relax and not have to worry about too much. Robert, is there anything that you're thankful for these days?
I'm thankful for a long holiday weekend too, Michael. Getting rest and actually sleeping. Not having to do much. So thanks for that, Michael. I will remind folks as you're entering in the room, please to mute your video as well. But also, if you could introduce yourself in the chat, your organization, and just what you're grateful for on this Gratitude Tuesday, that'd be really awesome. It's really great to see some familiar faces in the audience today. And we're really glad that folks are here to join us this morning. So I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, take about 2-3 minutes, and also just share anything that you might be thankful for on Gratitude Tuesday. And I'll kick it off to Joanna here. She's to my left.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. I'm Joanna Colangelo. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact at the Albuquerque Community Foundation. It's so great to see everybody here. Or to see names, of folks here. Really, really excited to be joining everybody today. This should be a really fun discussion, given the unfun circumstances, but certainly a fruitful conversation. And I think what I'm thankful for, certainly in addition to the nice long holiday and weekend and some relaxation, I try to be an eternal optimist whenever I can, and so over the past week and a half, going on to news sites and seeing updates every day about new vaccines and the effectiveness of those vaccines, and starting to see that they may be getting shipped imminently to places, and seeing the huge airline partners come on board as partners in this logistical miracle as it may be if this all happens according to plan. So I'm really grateful to, for the first time in many, many months, be able to start to kind of dream again about a future that may start to look like something we know to resemble the past. So that's what I'm thankful for today.
That's awesome. Thanks, Joanna. I appreciate it. I'll pass it to Claude, who's right next to, or right below me, actually.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here as well. Gosh, I'm thankful for so much. I am working from home, which I am incredibly thankful for. But I'm also thankful for my family. We've been spending a lot of time together, as everyone can probably imagine, as everyone probably is with their families as well. We've been spending a lot of time together and, hanging out, doing cool stuff, given the circumstances. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Claude. Appreciate it. Last but certainly not least is Melissa Fox.
My name is Melissa Fox. I'm the Director of Community Investments at United Way. I feel like I'm thankful for all of those things. I'm really thankful to get to work from home. I know that that's sort of a privilege in these times. And to get to work from home, I had my son back in August, and I've gotten to be home with him this whole time, which such a blessing. I mean, honestly, like, I'm a little stir crazy because I don't think I've left the house in like so many months, except to go to the doctor. But I'm so thankful that I get to spend this time with him and get to see him like grow up and be, even though we discussed before everyone got on the call that pandemic babies are going to be weird. So like I don't know what that's going to turn out like, but I'm excited to see.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I haven't actually, I've left the house, but maybe to go grocery shopping, and that's about it. I've been home for 8 months. People are like, I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm like, I haven't seen a lot of other people in a long time. So, but welcome everybody. It's so great to see everybody. So we're just going to dive in to our very first question. And it has a lot to do with, some of those inequities. So the pandemic has only exacerbated existing inequities in our communities. How have you seen this playing out in terms of its impact in communities in particular? And how is your organization addressing this? And I'll jump to Joanna first.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So this is a huge question and a great question. And, I think we're seeing it impact the communities in so many ways. We've seen, the disproportionate issues on Pueblo lands, on tribal communities. We've seen huge access to technology issues for students and business owners and families. And so we've certainly seen, mental health crisis among, so many people who have lost jobs or who have already been struggling with mental health issues and are now isolated, and the lack of access to those services. So, for us, we back at the beginning of COVID, and I can talk more about this a little bit later with some other questions, but we had partnered, or the Community Foundation partnered with a number of other donors and funders locally to establish the Emergency Action Fund, which was really an immediate way to get funding out into the nonprofit community. This is when we still thought we might be home for 2 weeks. We had no idea what we were looking at. And when that first round of funding, that fund really existed for about 3 months, and it was very kind of basic needs, $5,000 grants, whatever we can do to get out as quickly as we can. And once organizations kind of settled in, and I think there was some PPP funding deployed, and everybody could almost take a breath for a second, that group of Emergency Action Fund funders came back together and said, okay, we still had some money left in that fund, a fairly significant amount, and thought, what can we do next? And that was when we really started at that point seeing some of seeing how COVID really exacerbated a lot of those inequities across the board. And so we kind of put our heads together, but, based a lot on some of the feedback we had been getting from our nonprofit partners and what we had been seeing in the community, and reopen that fund for much larger grants, higher impact grants that were really focused on a few areas that had COVID had really shined a light on creating some big challenges or heightening some pre-existing challenges. And that, of course, was access to technology, access to devices, software for under-resourced populations, digital literacy, and even just virtual communications. We focused also on family stability, which included everything from, looking at increased levels of child abuse, domestic violence, access to mental and behavioral health services, and then, of course, education gaps. Which ties back to some of those other areas, but looking at how funding could facilitate distance learning, reducing learning gaps and out of school time. So we did that. We had some really great, I think some really initial strong grants come out of it, and then one thing that we certainly saw even after that fund kind of temporary or closed for all intents and purposes at that time, we still continue to see huge gaps in access to technology across the board. And so at the Community Foundation, we just sort of set up a Tech for Students drive, which as we were raising money for it, just we're continuously kind of granting money out to organizations so that students or even youth who are trying to be connected to employment purposes could have access to any kinds of devices, whatever they needed. So, you know, that was kind of our initial response. I think we're going to continue to see things change by the day, by the week, over the next 12 months. So,
thanks for that, Joanna. I'm going to pass it to Claude. Is there just your perspective on this question would be really helpful.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just back up for a second because I failed to kind of give some insight into what I do. So I manage the Fulcrum Fund, which is a grant program at 516 Arts. It's one of our core organizational programs, and what it is it's really one of its kind in the state, and a majority. Well, now it's kind of being joined by partners of the regional granting program for the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, most recently in Tucson and in Denver. But we've been a part of the network since 2016, and what we do is we offer grants of a total amount of grants of $60,000 in increments of $2,000 to $10,000 to visual artists that live and work within 80 miles of Albuquerque. But one of the things that we saw early on back in March is we were about to release our normal call for proposals for this next round of granting, is that there was this going to be what we kind of imagined was going to be a crisis for artists, and kind of at the same time, Warhol Foundation contacted us and asked us if we might be able to pivot and offer emergency relief grants to visual artists, which we were kind of already hopefully trying to figure out a way to do that. And so one of the things that has come to light is artists are always kind of a vulnerable population, in part because they don't have stable full-time employment. They might work multiple part-time jobs, you know, in gig work or consulting, or rely on commissions or selling their artwork. And one of the things we see is if one of those avenues kind of dries up, then they're able to kind of pivot and adapt to kind of round out their income. But with the pandemic, it's so unprecedented that all of those avenues have kind of dissolved at the same time, simultaneously. So in addition to the inequity that exists within communities, as Joanna mentioned, with tribal communities, Pueblos, communities of color, that also applies to artists as well, who are being particularly hit very, very hardly. So one of the things that we've encountered is outreach to those communities when we're trying to kind of essentially get the word out for these opportunities. Is really being able to have contacts within those communities to spread the word, because we obviously want to get the funds that we have available directly into the hands of those people that need it. So obviously one of the things that has come up too is the digital divide, which is, I think people generally tend to think of as a developing nation problem or issue, but it's very real in New Mexico as well. There were so many people that I talked to that were having issues with stable internet, or, that digital literacy issues of being able to, things that we take for granted, like filling out PDFs online or attaching attachments in emails and things like that, we're taking lots of time to kind of help explain to people or kind of help people walk them through those issues, to hopefully, to essentially allow them to apply for these opportunities so they can get funding for, everyday essentials. So those inequities are being exacerbated, to a large extent amongst these vulnerable populations. So, those are just a small number of things that we've encountered over the past 8 or 9 months.
Thanks, Claude. Appreciate it. I'll pass to Melissa.
I think I'm with Joanna and Claude that this is just a really big question about how it's exacerbated existing inequalities in our communities. I think I want to highlight the Pueblo communities, as Joanna did, that we saw, you know, a huge spike in cases there and trouble getting supplies there, and a need to like refocus efforts towards that community. And I don't know that United Way has been historically known for our nimble funding. We were pretty rigid for a really long time, but I think this sort of turned us on a dime, and we did have a new CEO and a new chief impact officer. So that enabled us to really kind of change the way we think about funds. We worked with Joanna on the Emergency Action Fund, and we worked with the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center to start the Pueblo Relief Fund. And I think it's really exciting to think about how to these inequities that happen and these communities that are suffering even more, like to be more nimble with our funding and more reactive in the sense that we're like thinking about how can we respond to crises more quickly, and not just with funding, but with strategic partnerships. I think working with ACF was amazing. It was really cool to be able to talk to nonprofits and to communities about, you know, like we're doing this and ACF is doing this and we're working together. And it wasn't just them, it was also PNM and I think NM Gas was in there. I know I'm missing people, but it was really cool to see how we can kind of re-energize our funds to finally really respond to where we've needed to, but maybe couldn't quite get to, like boots on the ground style.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Melissa. Thank you so much. And also just to highlight too, like a lot of these inequities, they've existed for a long time. And there's a reason for them, and it has a lot to do with white supremacy. Like there's a reason why, you know, folks are shoved out on reservations, because we've done that historically as a country through genocide and through forgetting. So I think I have one more question, but I think I'll save it for later. But I'm going to pass it to Michael to ask the next one.
All right, thank you, Robert. So you all kind of mentioned how you pivoted, shifted a little bit during the pandemic as far as funding goes. So can you guys share with us a success story about how your funding has helped the nonprofit community? So if you have a very specific success story, we would love to hear about it, because it's always nice to have, to hear these specific examples of everything that you guys are doing. So Joanna, we'll start with you on that.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So I'm gonna not be specific at all, so I apologize for that. But I was actually thinking about this question this morning, and it's really hard. It's really hard for me to pick one. There's been a lot of the nonprofit response to this pandemic has been nothing short of extraordinary in how organizations have been able to respond and quickly respond and fill massive gaps in our community. And so it was actually very hard for me to pick one. So what I will say is that what we did pretty early on, really back in March, and we'll be continuing through 2021 and quite possibly even beyond that, was to take all of our programmatic funding and immediately change it to general operating funding, so unrestricted funding to nonprofits. And I think because of things like that, we've been able to see some of the success stories that we have, and really has opened up the opportunity for nonprofits to pivot as they need to be as flexible and as nimble as they need to be during this time. It's impossible for an organization to map out a program right now and think that that's going to stay exactly as anticipated. It's hard to do that on a good year when there isn't a pandemic. It's impossible to do it in a year like right now when things are changing every single day. And so, that for us was a very immediate and honestly a very easy thing that we were able to do, was just say, here's the grant, do what you need to do with it. We, the Albuquerque Community Foundation has been in this community for almost 40 years. We inherently trust the nonprofits we work with. They're incredible organizations, and there's no reason in a time like this that we would want to put any more restrictions on funding. We would want to do the complete opposite. And so So my answer, of course, is a vague one, but it's to say that I think with that flexibility, with that openness to say work as you need, respond as you need, has just provided an opportunity for already really creative, innovative organizations to be even more so, because they can respond in the moment as they need to.
Nice, thank you, Joanna. I know that what you just mentioned has been mentioned by pretty much all of the nonprofits who have spoken since March. A lot of the funders have become a lot more lenient with the way that they're allowing the funding to be spent. And so I know that it's appreciated from the nonprofit side as well. So I think that, yeah, we appreciate.
We're all in this together.
Thank you. Cool. Melissa, same question. I guess you can be vague or you can go specific, whatever works for you, because Joanna's answer was actually very good.
It was so good.
Yes.
I know it's hard to go after Joanna. I think let's see. I want to be a little specific, and I want to talk about a really cool idea that a donor had that we kind of took and ran with the Feeding Families Fund. And what I think was really cool about that was that it was not only to help nonprofits, because there's a lot of stuff that happened after COVID-19 that we don't think about because it didn't happen directly to us. Like, we don't have necessarily direct clients at United Way. So maybe what didn't occur is that anybody who was feeding families or feeding individuals with volunteers immediately had to change that because of the pandemic. Like, the risk was way too high, especially, when this all first started and nobody had PPE and nobody knew what we should be doing. That's complicated. All of a sudden, you have this volunteer in-kind expense that becomes an internal operational expense on top of not being able to host fundraising and all of that. Anyway, long story to say that I thought that the Feeding Families Fund was a really cool idea where we partnered. I don't know if you're familiar with like Bocadillos was one of the restaurants, which I super love. I love Marie. I think their food is delicious. She's a good person. And we partnered them with a nonprofit. And we gave the funds so the nonprofit could purchase. They didn't have to choose Bocadillos, but a local restaurant, they could purchase food from a local restaurant to feed their clients. And I just have to say, that was so cool. It was so cool to see the relationships that persisted even past the Feeding Families Fund. It was really cool to see, I think restaurant owners in this time, I know we serve nonprofits, but this is hard for everybody. And I feel terribly for restaurant owners and anybody who works in the food service industry right now. They're really struggling. And I think their ability to pivot and change and become this kind of impromptu catering company for our nonprofits. We chose 7, one of which was Haven House, and it was just so important to me. I was speaking to, she's no longer the executive director, but Roberta Radosevich, about, I was on the phone with her and she's like, we all of a sudden are buying these meals and then we're trying to figure out how do we get them delivered. And so somebody has to go get the van, and that's so complicated. It was so much all at once. And so it was really cool to be able to partner her with a restaurant, and then they could just deliver the meals there and we could just help fund that. And the community really came together to help us fundraise for that too. Sorry, that was kind of long.
No, that was great. Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing to see these different partnerships and stuff that are created and built during this time, because everybody's being very creative with their time and their money and limited resources and everything. I know we'll talk about partnerships here a little bit later on, but yeah, thank you for that example. Thank you. Claude, same question to you. Can you tell us about some kind of success story that your organization has had?
Sure. I mean, I think both Melissa and Joanna touched on that I guess inherent right now there's a kind of an inherent desire to be collaborative, and for other organizations to realize that there are bigger ways to do things. Specifically for us, we partnered with the Frederick Hammersley Foundation, which is located here in Albuquerque. We've done 3 rounds of emergency grant funding. Rounds 2 and 3, Hammersley partnered with us in order to amplify those efforts and the amount of money that we were able to give away. But after the first round, they had some money that they wanted to do something with, but they didn't quite know how to do it. As a foundation, you can't give money directly to individuals. So they had to kind of go through someone. And they had a colleague who suggested the Fulcrum Fund. And so they ended up funneling money through us, which we were then able to re-grant to individuals that needed it. So I think there's a lot of ways in which people are figuring out creative ways to work together, or creative ways to kind of work around shared interests and needs, and they're reaching ways, reaching people and ways to connect people that they wouldn't maybe be able to do by themselves or alone. So and I think that also kind of builds excitement in the nonprofit community. People hear about these things through different channels, and so it kind of gets the word out. I mean, we are all in this together, right? Like, we just want to help people. So being able to connect with as many people as possible in order to do that has been tremendously helpful.
Nice, that's awesome. Thank you very much. I've noticed with my organization as well, I work for the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association, and we've definitely received money from funders to give directly to farmers, because they kind of had the same issue that you mentioned about not being able to give money directly to a person. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to shoot it back over to Robert, who's going to ask you guys the next question.
Thanks, Michael. Actually, on the note of partnerships, I think that's the question we'll ask next. I know foundations and funders always tell nonprofits to collaborate, but it's always nice to see foundations collaborate too. So our question is about, how is your organization partnering with other groups to address a lot of the challenges that you've mentioned earlier in the conversation? And then, like a compound question, what suggestions do you have for people, organizations, or businesses looking to partner with you? Joanna and Melissa, you mentioned earlier, like, that United Way and the Community Foundation have partnered a lot, especially for emergency relief, but you've partnered in different ways too over the last 6 months. Could y'all talk a little bit more about what that looks like for y'all? And I'll pass to Melissa first.
Ooh, okay, pressure's on. Yeah, we've partnered with ACF a lot in the last year, like more than the entire time I've worked at United Way, I think, which has been so cool. It's been really cool to partner not only on funds, but also on talking about resources for different nonprofits and how we can collaborate to get different collaborations together for nonprofits. I think that's really interesting to work with ACF on so many different fronts. I want to hand it off to, I want to hear what Joanna has to say, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, yes. So I'll talk a little bit about the United Way partnerships, but I'd be remiss not to talk about some other partnerships too in the COVID response work. With the Emergency Action Fund, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the whole community for that. That was within 48 hours of the initial shutdown in March. ACF and United Way, in addition to a number of other corporate partners, Wells Fargo, Ncinda Foundation, PNM, Bank of Albuquerque, Bank of America, McCune Foundation. I'm sure I'm missing some, but there, and some major individual donors came together to establish the Emergency Action Fund. Within 48 hours of the shutdown, we had our first round of grants out. That's an amazing undertaking by so many partners, and so that kind of kicked off the COVID response work, I think, and got everybody kind of on the same page. You kind of take your individual foundation or company hat off at the door, and you come in and you figure out what we all share, which is the desire to support our community and get through this time. But I'll say every single COVID response initiative that the Community Foundation has undertaken during this time has been in partnership with someone else, at least one other partner, if not multiple. So, we worked with the McCune Foundation to put together a creative economy response program for some local artists. The Altogether New Mexico Fund it was working with all the other community foundations in the state. New Mexico Funders Collaborative came together to support some access to education or access to technology work in the Albuquerque area. New Mexico Oil and Gas Association has done a lot of work with us around hunger relief. and some economic development work for some small businesses. Sandia Foundation we worked with to get all their grants unrestricted this year, and Facebook we worked with to do some business support in Valencia County. It's just, I hear a lot that, Albuquerque, we don't have those huge corporate entities. We don't have a Microsoft, we don't have a Nike or whatever, but we have a lot of groups that manage to work really well together. And we know each other very well. We trust each other very well. And I put all of us together against one of those massive entities any day of the week. I think we have great impact in this community. And just to get back to your other question, Robert, the other work that ACF has really been involved in with United Way over the past 6 to 8 months, I guess, has really been around the DEI United work, which is the two organizations coming together to start to look more closely at ways that we could be engaging the community around diversity, equity, inclusion issues within the nonprofit community, within funding for the nonprofit community, and just partnerships in general. And that's very much an ongoing process that has kind of run parallel to some of the COVID work.
And to follow that, thank you, Joanna. You did dynamite. Look at you listing all the organizations. Good job. I'm impressed. But to follow that about what nonprofits could do, I think it's been really helpful to the humility and the transparency is the word I was going for there, from nonprofits has been amazing, right? I've had nonprofits call me, we also unrestricted our funding from the last grant cycle as soon as we realized what was at stake. And I think getting calls from folks to be like, I think it's so funny, they're calling me now and they wanted what do you need for the report? Calm down. Just help people. We just want you to help people. But I think calling us and talking to us about what you need and working, I've never seen nonprofits work together the way they are now. I mean, we have some great, amazing nonprofits that work with all kinds of partners. And I do agree that we've been harping on nonprofits to collaborate. And then, those are hard. And really, it's a lot of trust that has to go into even two nonprofits deciding to work together and share information. And all of that is just a lot of trust and practice, I think it takes. And I'm so impressed with the nonprofits that have been able to come together in that. I think those unique asks that come to nonprofits, it doesn't hurt to ask us. We're trying to be super nimble with our funding. So when I hear about a project that's, several partners working together and, we're going to do this piece and we're going to do this piece and we're all going to work together and it's going to help this many people, that's fantastic. And however we can support that. If it's operational, then it's operational. I realize that I'm saying that from United Way and we've been program. But we want to help nonprofits thrive in this time. Especially, we hope that the PPP really helped people stay afloat. And then how can we get you to the next level in your programming or in whatever you're trying to do for our community, especially those nonprofits that have really pivoted to try and specifically address the COVID-19 issues and inequity issues. I think that's so interesting.
Thanks, Melissa. What about you, Claude? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think when we generally tend to think of partners or a partnership, we tend to think of money changing hands. And I think that for smaller nonprofits, that's might not always be the case. So I think there are other ways to partner that amplify efforts that go beyond money. That I mentioned earlier about trying to get the word out. And we have these opportunities that sometimes go statewide, and we don't necessarily have the same kind of networks or contacts in the southern part of the state or the northern part of the state or on tribal lands. So it's really important. It's vital for the for the success of programs that you have connections and people who can kind of help spread the word. And so, partnerships might be marketing partnerships where somebody kind of helps you spread the word, or, get in touch with their people to get in touch with their people, kind of thing. So, I think looking at the idea of a partnership is kind of multifunctional, whether it's money or whether it's some other resource or aspect that's integral to the success of a program. I mean, that can take on a number of shapes, but I think being open to what a partnership can be or needs to be, I think is important too.
Thanks, Claude. I also just want to follow up question to Melissa. I think you and Joanna, you all hit this on the head a little bit. We've gone through a lot of relief funding for the last 6-7 months or so, and what are some of the things that funders are doing now that could help us survive, like you mentioned, Melissa, thrive not only through the pandemic but into next year and beyond? Because I think one of the things that the crisis is kind of obviously has highlighted is that we were already in a housing crisis before the eviction crisis. We were already in a hunger crisis before the crisis. So what are some things that y'all are planning or doing that could help organizations, communities get through and beyond? And Melissa, it's you.
I got excited. I think this is the time to really address the inequities that you talked about, Robert. I think that a lot of these crises exist, and hunger insecurity, food insecurity, and housing insecurity. I think those exist because of huge inequities in our community. We had these problems, like you said, long before the pandemic, and now's the time to address them. I'm really impressed with the DEI work, though I'm not directly on the committee. I think that's how we move the needle. I think we stop trying to do things the way that we've done them, and we really just get to know the communities that are hurting. I really enjoy having. I feel like we had a really good opportunity to sit down with some of the nonprofit partners and just ask about what's happening, what's going on, and talk to their clients and talk to people who really are the ones experiencing the hardships. I think that's the most impactful way to do funding is to help, to ask people what they need, and then strategize with partners how we can get it to them. Joanna, you want to jump in?
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. So I certainly agree with all of that, and I think the other thing to do is to not lose the partnership momentum that's been created. So the New Mexico Funders Collaborative, it's a group of about 13 funders each year. They've been working together for about 5 years now, 5.5 years, and for 3 of those years have been working on collaborative kind of high impact grant making around education. And so when COVID hit, the first thing that group did was come together and say, okay, what are we gonna do? What's our response? How are we gonna work on this? And a lot of those organizations, companies, foundations were some of those seed funders in the Emergency Action Fund. It was kind of married very quickly. And so I think, I say that because we've seen even more partnerships over this time, and those relationships have grown even stronger. And so as we look towards what we're going to need to be doing in the future and taking on some massive rebuilding and redevelopment work, I think it's time to go back to those partnerships and see what we can all do together, because it'll be very hard. I think almost impossible if each funding entity is doing our own thing in our own way. I mean, I understand there's going to be some of that we just have to do based on our structures and all of that, but to make really sort of sustainable massive change around things like hunger or housing or some of these bigger inequity issues, we have to be doing it together. And so let's take the opportunity that we've had in COVID to get to know each other even more, to have built even more trust and more friendship with one another, to start to look at grant programs once we know what we're in the middle of yet another spike right now. And so, once we get a little bit more towards the other end of this, start to work with the nonprofits as they're coming together to tackle huge issues, so that it's sort of like massive partnerships on the nonprofit side meet massive partnerships on the funding side, and I think that's where that might be the sweet spot some big community initiatives. But, right now I think a lot of people are still literally in that survival mode of just getting through the day and getting through the year. So that would be my hope going forward. We don't lose our friendships.
That's a great response. Thanks, Joanna. Claude?
Yeah, I think maintaining partnerships is vital for, maintaining the energy that's been created during this time. Also, I think doubling down too. I mean, we're as recipients of Warhol Foundation grants. Warhol Foundation really doubled down, at the beginning of this year in order to expand the scope of their program. So up until March, there were 16 partners in this national network, and it was their goal to double the size of the network. So now we're looking at 32 partners across the country, which includes, states that have been underinvested in, with regard to the arts. Puerto Rico is included, but so now by scaling up, they're showing tremendous leadership in terms of valuing the arts and the things that we think of as culturally important, but also playing a role within those communities. Artists, obviously are among the kind of vulnerable demographic of people who are doing important things, culturally speaking. So I think funders are recognizing the importance. I mean, again, specifically from the arts, they're recognizing the importance and the vulnerable place that artists are in. So, but by helping those who need help, you kind of really help to uplift a lot of communities. So, I think by investing in those underserved communities, I think you can really kind of move the needle in a different direction.
Just quickly follow up on something Claude said. Sorry, Robert. You feel free to boot me out of the chat. It's fine.
No, go for it.
I would understand. Earlier he mentioned about talking about how do we collaborate without money necessarily changing hands, and I think that's super important. We've been really privileged to help nonprofits and blessed to help nonprofits in a marketing front and on a recruiting front, and I love that. I love the idea that we can offer more than just funding, right? It's really, if nothing energizes my soul, like when we have nonprofits that are working together and, we can give them funding to help them do that work. That's fantastic. I love doing that. But it's a step further when we can help them partner with a marketing team or someone we know or someone in the community. We have tons of people who want to volunteer right now but don't know how because you can't show up anywhere and spread your COVID. So I think it's really important that we find ways to help each other on so many levels. That's how we're going to get to a thriving place. It's going to be a new, different place that I hope we don't recognize, to be honest, that involves some intricate partnerships and collaborations and funders and nonprofits really working together in a systemic way. Partnering on policy issues that nonprofits tell us to lift up. That's something that I think we should be doing. And helping them in marketing, and if they need paperwork is something that I feel like program managers shouldn't be working on, right? If they need help with filing something or something, I feel like that's where funders can step in and help. Not that I know anything about paperwork, but I might know people.
I work in grants and teaching people how to do federal grants. So yes, help in paperwork is actually very, very needed. Very needed. Like that overhead thing. We need that. We need that a lot.
So helpful, right? We can be helpful in that way most times.
I know Erin Hilcom is on the call too. I'm sure she's nodding her head going, yeah, those federal grants, they get a little crazy. So, Michael, I'll kick it over to you to ask her our last question, and then we'll move into breakout groups.
Thank you, Robert. Let's see. This last question is the question that we always ask any of our presenters at the last question of the day, and it's how can our community help you today? What can we do to help you? Anything that you can think of, just feel free to share it with us. So we'll start with you, Joanne. Or Joanne.
Yeah. So I think, for us, this is going to be share the ideas. Let us know what you're doing out in the community. There was one of the questions on here that we didn't get into too much today, but it's really worth saying is, what are some of the challenges that we've faced? And for me, it's one of the hardest things this year. Prior to the pandemic, at least 50% of my time was not in the office. It was out in the community. It was working, with nonprofits directly, site visits, conversations, all of that. And that it all went away. It's really hard to be a real community-based funder if you're not able to be in the community like you're used to. And Zooms are great and phone calls are great, but it's really different than, walking around the International District and talking to individuals there and just hanging out with people and seeing what's going on. It's so different. And that a lot of times that's when the great ideas bubble up, just because you just kind of happens organically. And so what I would say is don't ever think twice about picking up the phone and calling the Community Foundation and saying, we have this great idea that we're trying to work on. We just don't know how to get it started, or we might need a little seed funding, or we don't even need funding right now. We just need a partner. We need some partnerships. We don't know where to start. Please tell us. We love good ideas. We want to be some of the first ones in on that. Especially if ideas are going to lead to things like national funding. It's really important for us as a local community funder to invest local dollars in something first before bigger money comes later. It says a lot about the belief in a program and the backing of a program here in Albuquerque. So we want to hear about it. And unlike past years, we're just not out there as much. We're just not able to be right now, but we will be again. So please call us and let us know.
Thank you, Joanna. I think, communication is so important right now because there are so many of those conversations that end up happening naturally face-to-face, but they can be lost in translation in an email or a Zoom call or whatever. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you. And Melissa, what have you, how can we help United Way today?
Well, Joanna stole my answer. So there's that. That was a great answer. I love that. Call me with your ideas or email me. I love to hear that. I guess what I would say on top of please be communicative about your ideas, and United Way is looking into a way to create a space for that, specifically for people to tell us. I guess the other thing that I want to hear is about how we can make our own process better. Sometimes people are a little afraid to criticize funders. I mean, I will say that I don't know that anyone is afraid to criticize United Way, but I can see why people would be hesitant sometimes to tell a funder, this part of your application or this part of something is difficult, or, creates this undue burden on us. Because this is the time. We have a pretty lengthy grant process, and we have already, before pandemic, reduced it and tried to make it more streamlined, but even more so with COVID-19. We have really changed the way we think about funding. And so I think this is the pivotal time. If you have a cool idea about DEI or about how United Way could step up in a different way, or, I think we want to hear it. And not only that, if you and partners are working together in this cool collaborative way, we want to hear about that too. That would be super helpful, is to just hear, even if we can't solve the problems, because I can't solve everybody's problems, but I sure want a chance to try, right? Sometimes we don't know who can be helpful until we just start talking, and we start interacting with each other about, hey, I have this one thing that we could help. So that's what I would say, is just ask. Worst we can say is no.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. Help goes both ways. So I can see how that would be beneficial to your process to hear from people who've gone through it and give you suggestions as well. All right, Claude, same question to you. What can we as a community do to help you today?
I would say one of the things that people can do is if they feel passionate about something, find a way to get involved, whether or not that, under normal circumstances, whether that's volunteering or offering your time in some other way. We always say become a friend of 516 Arts. So that's, essentially buying a membership, that goes back into the organization that helps us to continue doing what we're doing. So money's always great. I know we talked about earlier how partnerships don't have to be just money, but if you can help in other ways, if you're, speaking specifically about grants, and you want to volunteer about helping people learn how to write grants better or doing professional development. I mean, I think there's no shortage of opportunities and need to impart those skills on artists. And I think there's a lot of ways to get involved, but now's a challenging time to do that in a face-to-face capacity. Obviously, we're doing all this over Zoom and whatnot, but just start by having conversations. Asking what people need help with, and seeing what comes of it. Because I think there's always people who are in a sense maybe want to help but don't know how to go about doing it. So I think to both Joanna and Melissa's points about just having a conversation, calling somebody up and say, this sounds like a really amazing program. How can I help? Or I want to help in some way. So I think just being vocal about it, or showing your support, whether that's showing up to events when you can show up to events, or attending things online, just being an active participant in your community, I think is huge.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All three of you mentioned, asking and communicating clearly. And I think even more that's important these days. Cool. So I'm going to send it over to Robert, and he's going to put us in breakout rooms and do a little bit of networking.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to do the time warp, and we're going to go into the breakout rooms. It's what it feels like, that or feeling like going through a transporter in Star Trek. So as you're going into breakout rooms, just be sure to introduce yourself, your organization, if you have any questions, or if you are with one of our panelists, feel free to ask lots of questions. And we will do that here in 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today at Impact and Coffee. We hope you join us next week. We have a very special conversation about volunteerism during the pandemic, so join us on December 8th. And then on December 15th, we are celebrating our 5th anniversary, so we cannot wait for that to celebrate 5 years of Impact and Coffee with all of you. Thanks so much to our audience today for joining us. So many familiar faces. It was really great to see everybody. Thanks to our panelists for joining us and giving us some great insight into their work and work in our communities. And big thanks to the Impact and Coffee team, Aaron and Juan and Bree and Michael, and our new team member, Danny. Thank you so much for all of your hard work in bringing Impact and Coffee thrice monthly. We'll see you next week. We hope you have a really great Tuesday, and may all your lights be green. Thanks, y'all. Take care.